Brian Brock, a noted geologist from Franklin, who will give a presentation on pipeline.
Good evening. We'll try it without the microphone first. If you can't hear me, we'll then go to the microphone. By now you've heard that the two companies want to run a huge natural gas pipeline through Sydney and Franklin, either El Paso or Williams. Tonight I'd like to bring you up to speed on why they want this pipeline, how they would build it, possible consequences for us, what we can do to protect ourselves, and some of the latest details on the project. But first, the why. These are the hundreds of thousands of miles of pipeline that move natural gas around our country. The dense networks here are where the gas is produced, and the rest of the network is to transport the gas to where it will be consumed. Many of the wells down here in the Gulf of Mexico supply gas to the northeast. Here's the part of the interstate transport system owned by the largest domestic pipeline company, Kinder Morgan. The orange lines belong to the El Paso pipeline group, which was just recently bought by Kinder Morgan. Some of those lines were built by the Tennessee Gas Pipeline Company, which El Paso bought years ago. And here's this part of the system built by the Tennessee Gas Pipeline Company. Again, it was built over many decades, designed to move the gas out of the Gulf of Mexico up into the northeast. However, things have changed since then. The new technologies of horizontal drilling and slickwater fracking have produced huge and growing volumes of natural gas from the black shales such as the Marcellus and the Appalachian Basin, as you can see from these production numbers and projections. This has created a desire to build a new pipeline to move the gas from production in Pennsylvania to consumption in the Northeast. In particular, to these gas-powered electrical generating stations. Therefore, the Tennessee Gas Pipeline Company has proposed building a 36-inch gas pipeline, half again as large as Millennium, to carry the gas from the Tennessee number 300 pipeline down here in the town of Brooklyn, Susquehanna County, Pennsylvania, up here to the Tennessee number 200 pipeline in the town of Wright, Schoharie County, New York. Alternative A in green here was first proposed to avoid the Catskill Parks down here. However, when it was presented to the DEC in last December, the DEC took one look at it going straight through the New York City watershed and said that this would be trouble. Alternative B in red here avoids both the Catskill Park and the New York City watershed. This was presented in February. It is now the preferred route. Of course, this one goes close by here by Sydney Center. It crosses Route 23 just down the road east of Poplar Hill Road. In choosing a route, these are the sort of lands that the companies try to avoid whenever possible. Steep slopes, prime farmlands, and wetlands. They avoid steep slopes because they're difficult to build on and expensive. They avoid prime farmlands because it's bad publicity, and they avoid wetlands for both of those reasons. You can see that the alternative B goes through less of all these in total, much less of the steep slopes, but the trade-off is it goes through twice as much prime farmland. Also, the companies like to avoid developed areas such as villages and cities. They also like to avoid as many crossings as possible, roads, railroads, streams, and aqueducts, You can see that route B does a better job of that than route A. And here's how this plays out on the ground in my town of Franklin. The route would cross 357 downstream of the East Sydney Reservoir, crossing just west of Union Church Road. From there, it climbs up into the hills and stays along the crest of the ridge, carefully avoiding Otsego County, you can see. Then goes downhill a little bit, crossing Route 28 just down road of the landscaping business, and he continues eastward, paralleling the Charlotte Valley. Again, it stays in the hilltops, this time on the south side of the valley. Here's a timeline for the project. They could begin clearing ground in less than 18 months. Construction of these pipelines is regulated by FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. All I'll say about this is that once the company has signed enough customers to feed the gas in at one end and take the gas out at the other, as far as FERC is concerned, this is a done deal. The regulatory process is not so much about if as about when, where, and how. However, Anne Marie, who will be following me, will go into this in more detail.
And disagree.
Yes, she strongly disagrees. And so, if they build this pipeline, what will we see? Here's a summary of the pipeline process, an amazingly efficient process, like an assembly line. After the survey, they clear the woods, strip off the soil, lay out the pipeline. If necessary, they actually bend the straight sections of the pipeline in place, weld the sections together and test them, dig the trench, lower the completed pipeline down into it, cover it up, they hydro test it for leaks, and then regrade it. The construction of the 120-mile pipeline could be finished in 9 months. That's a rate of a half mile a day. And that's at a cost of over $3 billion for every half mile, or a total of $750 million for the entire pipeline. Now let's see what the construction looks like in detail. The first task is to clear a construction corridor of 100 to 125 feet wide. Next, the trench is dug. In agricultural land, it will be as much as 8 feet deep. 4 feet of cover, 3 feet for the pipeline, and a foot of padding down the bottom. The padding will probably have to be trucked in with many loads of sand and gravel. The route will go up on many of our hillsides where they're going to hit bedrock, which will mean blasting. Up here, the pipeline will be more shallowly buried, 18 inches instead of 4 feet. While they'll probably trench across most of our roads and creeks, some of the railroads and larger creeks, they will drill horizontally under the creek using one of these inclined drill rigs. Now, the pipe will, Canadian Pacific will probably bring the pipes in by rail to some siding, such as a place in Sydney. There, it will be offloaded onto trucks using one of these electromagnetic arms. Then the pipes will be trucked to the construction site. For Franklin, I estimated it would be 3,000 truck loads for bringing the pipeline in, just the pipeline. When the terrain is rough, they'll use some of these modified tractors called side booms to spread the pipe along the route. The pipeline is laid out along the route like so. This is a photo from the front page of the spring issue of our new Franklin Register, copies of which are available on the Mac for free. Here's a close-up of the site. They like to lay the pipe out in this en echelon fashion. The pipe has some flexibility, but where they have to make sharper turns, they actually bend the pipe on site. custom bending. Then the joints are welded together. This is a crucial step for safety. During welding, the two joints of pipe are aligned and pulled together using this device inside. Next, all the welds should be inspected visually, and some of them inspected with x-rays. Bad welds should be repaired, but the temptation is to cut costs. The new Millennium Pipeline leaked under a creek in Tioga. A weld that had earlier failed visual inspection was rejected, but then that length of pipe was used later anyway. Inspection ordered by the federal agency PHMSA found 2 more leaks and sloppy record keeping. PHMSA is the Pipeline Hazardous Material and Safety Administration. After inspection, the welds are sandblasted and then coated with epoxy to protect the metal. All finished, the pipeline is lowered from the trench using the side boom. You know, here they're using sandbags to pile the bottom of the trench. Every 10 to 20 miles, a main line or cutoff valve is installed. Most of the valves are manual like this one because they're cheaper than the automatics. But this requires somebody to drive out and close these valves in case of an emergency. The closest Tennessee office is in Sloansville in Schoharie County, over an hour away. According to a fire chief at the pipeline fire in Edison, New Jersey back in '94, it required 600 turns of this wheel to fully close the valve. It took over 6 hours. The trench is backfilled. The fill around the pipe is supposed to be free of large rocks. Knowing the soil up here, that means they're going to have to be trucking in a lot more sand and gravel. Local gravel pits could be quite busy. Once finished, the pipe section of the pipeline is filled with water to hydro-test it to see if it holds a pressure at 125% of the peak pressure or over 1800 psi. That's the pressure of a power washer. Finally, the easement is graded. Now, what would this pipeline mean for city center? Well, during the construction, which locally will last a few weeks to maybe a month or two, there will be increased local sales, but there will be considerable road damage. Once the pipeline is in place, there will be increased property taxes from the infrastructure. However, there will probably be offsetting decrease in the value from the neighboring properties. It would create a permanent easement on properties throughout the town. You'll be entered into a lottery for a possible compressor station, explosions and fires, and of course, once the pipeline infrastructure there, it will facilitate gas drilling if that should ever come to Delaware County.
What's permanent easement?
That's the taking of the right to the land under which they put the pipeline. It's sort of like a permanent grant. Let's see. Heavy trucks would rut the dirt roads up here. The weight limits for a well-built state road are 40 tons, but the low boys carrying equipment could be twice that on these dirt roads. Even worse, trucks would grind the paved roads to rubble because our roads lack a durable base. Construction of the Millennium Pipeline resulted in $1.2 million to local roads in the Colchester town, Sullivan County. The company had bonded for only $250,000. The town eventually negotiated another $125,000, but that left taxpayers on the hook for 2/3 of that cost. And this is what an easement looks like. It would create a 120-mile easement over hill and dale. Perfect highway for ATVs in summer and snowmobiles in winter. The permanent easement is only 50 feet, half the width of the construction easement, but the company does not replant the trees where they go through forests. In fact, they even use herbicides in some cases. Now, the easement is less of a problem if it's in your back 40 than if it's in your backyard. Surprisingly, FERC has no setback between a house and a pipeline, zero. Permanent easements are easy to spot because you can't plant any trees or even large shrubs on them. Nor can you build any structures such as not even a patio, deck, garage, pool, or septic system. Guidelines require permission for you to do anything more than walk, water, or mow on your own property. Compressor stations are nasty things with huge turbines, thousands of horsepower each, running 24/7, 365. This plan for the Northeast Exchange Pipeline does not show any compressors locally, only two, one at the start, one at the beginning. However, as the volumes of gas increase, booster stations may be added along the route, typically one every 40 to 80 miles. Now along the Millennium Pipeline, they have filed for permission to build the mini-sink compressor station in Orange County, southeast of Port Jervis, and the company has already selected the site for a second compressor station in Hancock, only 60 miles away. Keeping quiet about this during permitting reduces local opposition. Venting from the compressor station is a hazard to those living downwind. There's a constant slow leak of gases which are invisible. Red arrows here showing sources of leaks. However, in the infrared, you can see these greenhouse gases. Also, whenever the compressor stops, due to power outages, maintenance, or breakdowns, there are blowdowns of huge volumes of gas before the compressors can be restarted. Downwinder syndromes include headaches, nosebleeds, and rashes. The ceaseless noise can make the lives of neighbors miserable day and night. And explosions do happen. The roof was blown off this compressor station in March. Despite the orders from the Pennsylvania DEP, this station was up and running the next day. Turns out states do not have oversight in rural areas like here. This station was built by Cabot and run by Williams. More about them later. FERC rates the land's locations by the amount of development. We are in the least developed area, which means that it's cheaper to build and cheaper to operate. For example, there's a smaller percentage of wells that have to be x-rayed, the pipeline can be more shallowly buried, and the maximum operating pressure can be higher. And when it's the pipeline that fails, the results can be tragic. These two houses were reduced to cinder and 5 people were burned. This is the 30-inch Transco pipeline run by Williams, running at only 800 psi. Now here are the calculations for the maximum danger zone around pipeline fire. We're talking about several hundred feet. Now, the area for personal injury and death is usually only a couple hundred feet, but remember, FERC has zero setback between pipelines and homes. And here are the causes of pipeline accidents. Notice that half of these accidents could be avoided by the operator. Substandard materials in wells, corrosion that's let happen on the pipeline and not repaired, and operator errors. How costly are the accidents? Well, an average of, say, 275 accidents a year, say $150 million. And how dangerous? We're talking about roughly 25 fatalities a year and, say, 175 accidents a year. Now, these are all pipeline systems, but you've got to figure that most of these serious accidents are on gas pipelines. Once the pipeline is built, the regulatory authority passes from FERC to the Federal Department of Transportation's PHMSA, which I mentioned earlier. And in New York State, they deputize our Public Service Commission. How good is our PSC? Well, here, PHMSA rates the various state agencies about how good services they provide, from 0, terrible, to 3, excellent. For New York State, and they give a final total average score. For New York State, there's good and bad news. New York State here, we managed to make it in the top 10. However, we make that into the top 10 with a score of 1.5, which is 50%. We get to the top 10 not because we're so good, it's because everybody is so bad. Now, there are some things that the town of Sydney can do to protect itself. The list is only too brief. You can pass a road use ordinance to make sure that the roads are returned to good condition and taxpayers are not stuck with the bill. Gravel pits. Old gravel pits may be reopened, new ones may be built. You want to make sure your ordinances will give you the gravel pits that you want. Compressor stations. I don't think the town can completely zone out a compressor station because it's federally controlled, but they could restrict the areas in which the compressor stations could be built. So if you get one, at least it wouldn't be in the worst places. Ideally, you would like building codes to make sure they were built to the strictest standards, but there's a question about whether towns can do this. Currently out in western New York, National Gas is suing a town. They put in a compressor station. They had made various promises to the town about how well they would build the compressor station. The town put those specifications in their building code, and the gas company promptly sued them, saying that only FERC could set standards. The towns would not set any higher standards. Eminent domain. Transmission pipelines and utilities. The permit by FERC to build one grants the company the power of eminent domain. For us, possibly by fall of next year. Seizing easements by eminent domain has disadvantages for both sides. There are legal expenses, but of course this burden weighs much heavily on the individual landowner. For the landowner, eminent domain, so far as I know, sets only the price. You're going to be stuck with their boilerplate lease if you go into court. For the company, it's bad publicity, which some of them care, some of them don't. They are supposed to only go to eminent domain as a last resort after fair bargaining. But some of the companies, after one round of bargaining, file hundreds of requests with the court. Vera Scoggins and Craig Stevens will have a lot more to say about dealing with them. In my opinion, there's little to be gained by not eventually signing an easement as long as it's a good easement. You should know about easements before the landman comes knocking. As with a lease for gas drilling, the agreement with landmen that the landmen stick under your nose is written to give every advantage to the company. Here are only a few things you should be wary about. Term. There's no reason that the easement has to be forever. It could be 20 years with one possible renewal for another 20 years, or whatever you can get away with. There's absolutely no reason why it should be forever. The price per foot, I'll go into a little later. Location, their easement agreement is usually a blanket easement agreement for your whole property. If they promise you it's only going to be up in the corner, that means absolutely nothing. It should be in writing in your easement. Typically, as I said, the permanent easement is 50, the construction is 100. Surface facilities. Their agreement will let them put any surface facility in the easement. If you don't want any, you should specify so. Additional pipelines. Your agreement should be only for that single pipeline. Indivisible. It should not allow the pipeline company to later sublet that easement to other companies for money which they will not share with you. It should not be exclusive. If you ever want to put another easement across your property, you should be able to sign it. You should be able to do it, but their agreement will awfully give them that right. Company access should be specified. Typically, it's unrestricted, their easement. Landowner uses, your uses should be spelled out in that agreement. Herbicides, if you care whether they use that on the agreement. Abandonment, the typical easement agreement just lets them leave the pipeline in place, which when it starts to rust and collapse, and become a diversion for water. Everything should be insured by the company, and they should be agree to indemnify you if you are sued by somebody else. They should warrant your deed, not you. It should be fully recorded at the county office. Secrecy, that might be up to you whether you want to share that information with your neighbors or not. This is a very important one, dispute resolution. You might think because the easement is New York, the laws of New York would apply, but often in these agreements, it's the state that the company is incorporated in, which would be like Texas or Oklahoma. Also, the venue in which the dispute is going to be settled. Almost always these agreements are for arbitration, which means you split the price of that agreement, and there's one final non-appealable decision. Now, more about the landowner compensation. Here are some of the things I think you should be compensated for. The loss of use of the right-of-way. Typically, this does not amount to much. The companies usually figure this as 50% of the purchase price of empty land, which around here runs about $1 a running foot for a 50-foot easement. Inconvenience during construction, the fact that they may be dividing your property into, the devaluation of your property. Typically, Pennsylvania and along the Millennium Pipeline, I've seen values of 5 to 15, maybe as much as $25 a running foot for the easement. Here's something I think is greatly unfair. This is a one-time payment. You receive no annual rental fee for the fact that they are shipping, 630 million cubic feet a day in that pipeline under your land. This sort of agreement is sort of like somebody knocks on your door and tells you that they are going to rent one of your rooms. They're going to choose which room it is. They're going to choose how much they pay you one time, and you'll never see another dime as long as they live in your room. Exactly where and when the pipeline was built has been complicated by the second pipeline proposed by Williams and Cabot. Yes, that's the same Williams of the Appomattox pipeline fire and the Lathrop compressor station, which I showed you earlier. And Cabot, if you follow the news, is the one who's responsible for all of that water pollution down in Dimmock, Pennsylvania. This pipeline would deliver gas to the same place, up Tennessee Gas Pipeline number 200, but would get the gas from further south from Williams' own Transco gas pipeline. Note that originally this route went further west and north, going through Otsego County. This project was announced in late February, only 2 weeks after the Northeast Extension's Route B became generally known. When, at the time, Alternative B was presented to the local government officials and leasing coalitions. This route is sketchy and seems to be hastily prepared. Only a few weeks later, this more refined route was presented. It's quite similar to the Northeast Extension Route B, particularly in Delaware County. Gas for the Constitution would come from, as I said, the Williams Transco pipeline, which, like the Tennessee number 300, was originally designed to bring gas from the Gulf Coast up to New England. And here is Williams' master plan for the area. If you remember my first slide where they had that dense network of pipes in the Gulf of Mexico, well, that's what Williams is planning for in Susquehanna County, with the gas gathered to a central compressor station complex here in Brooklyn, Susquehanna County. Rebecca Roeder from Brooklyn will have more to say about that. Now here, look at the two projects side by side. Not only do these two projects look remarkably similar, but in their filings, Constitution also proposed an alternate route, which is remarkably similar to Northeast Extension's Route A going through the watershed. Williams and Cabot seem to have hijacked Tennessee's project. I found nothing about the Constitution pipeline before February of 2012, whereas Tennessee was presenting their Northeast Extension project at least as far back as September 2009. Yet, rumors are that El Paso dropped their project once Williams announced their Constitution project. This is what I got from Williams about the question. The two projects are competing proposals. No one bought anybody out. And this is all I was able to get from El Paso. We are continuing to assess the needs for the project with potential customers. No further details to provide. In other words, go away. Now, why does Williams want to build a pipeline in our backyard? Here are some of the considerations for choosing a route. Geography, they want to minimize the road and stream crossing. They want to stay away from development. They want to stay away from farmland. For topography, they want to stay away from steep slopes, and they want to stay away from bedrock. Environmental, they want to stay away from wetlands. They say they want to co-locate in other right-of-ways, and they want to meet the wishes of landowners. Obviously, many of these are incompatible. So here's how this plays out with the Constitution pipeline. Note how it stays up in the hills along almost all its route, thereby avoiding the wetlands, prime farmlands, and the developed areas. However, being up on the hill, that's going to mean that it crosses a lot of bedrock. So how much area of shallow bedrock does Williams say they're going to find in our area? I've highlighted in the next slide. Yes, the entire route. And remember, in shallow bedrock areas, it can have as little as 18 inches of cover. Also, there's a problem of constructing in steep slopes. Here on these topographic maps, I've highlighted the areas of steep slope where special construction techniques will be, and expensive construction techniques will be required, including in the worst cases, actually winching the equipment and the materials up the slopes. So this is the western part of Sydney, town of Sydney. There's Sydney. Here's Route 23. Continuing eastward, there's the East Sydney Reservoir. More steep slope areas. Further eastward, going through Franklin, there's the Oilwood Valley. There's Otsego, steep slope areas. Here we're crossing, let's see, where is that? There's Route 28, steep slope areas there. I mentioned the mainline valves. Not all the pipeline is going to be underground. Here I've highlighted the areas where there will be mainline valves. You'll notice that they are 20 miles apart, the maximum spacing. One will be located off Wells Bridge Road, downstream of the East Sydney Dam. Here is the timeline for the Constitution pipeline. It doesn't seem to make any difference to us which company, El Paso or Williams, builds it. The timeline is pretty much the same. They would begin clearing the right-of-way in January 2014, 18 months away. So it looks like we're going to get the pipeline whether we like it or not. The trick is to keep it from becoming a mess for us and for our community. Here are some of the websites you can go to for more information. This is the website of FERC, which regulates the building of the pipeline. Here is for FEMSA, which regulates the operation of the pipeline. This is for the National Transportation Safety Board, which investigates pipeline accidents. DPS is where you go for New York State's Pipeline Regulatory Authority, the Public Service Commission. This is the Pipeline Safety Trust, a private organization that looks after pipeline safety. It was set up about a decade ago using millions of dollars of seed money from a legal settlement from a pipeline explosion out in the state of Washington where 3 boys died. This is the company website, constitutionpipeline.com. This is kind of interesting. This is the company's website for their employees with a little different spin. Thank you.
pipeline goes through these towns, will the towns be able to access gas from the pipeline?
Most likely not. I mean, it's just not economic. I mean, if it was going through a town like Oneonta, it might be worth, or Sydney, it might be worth them to put in a distribution system. But both Sydney and Oneonta already have gas supply. Well, Sydney will shortly.
City does not have gas.
No, but they want to build another Stockton pipeline and put it in there. So, no, there's no reason, there's no economic reason to tap into these lines, the transmission lines.
You might be able to, you should get some good along with the bad, I would think.
Well, about the only good the town see is from property tax.
It sounds like you were resigned to the idea that it's going to happen.
Largely so. I think the last few years, the 31 proposals, pipelines were proposed, and one was not approved. I mean, basically, FERC is a regulatory for how things are built, not if it will be built.
I'm from Pennsylvania, and stuff is going already. If you saw and lived with it, you wouldn't resign to the fact that it's going to happen.
Well, I mean, I don't see it being, in the end, all told, a plus for the community, but I'm not convinced that there's much of a lever that local people have with the federal process.
Just a comment about if you don't sign the right, people don't sign the right.
That's,
But my question was going to be the hubs, the manual hubs.
the mainline valves, ones that close,
Every 20 miles,
every 20 miles.
those are manual,
Yes.
6 hours to turn around.
No.
And what, the pressure is going to be in
Constitution, they talked about 1,480. Yeah, 1,480 square. But again, they
increase it.
right. Once they add those booster pressure stations along the way, they'll step that up.
What's the maximum, when you build the pipe, what's the maximum safe amount of the pipe itself?
The maximum what?
The maximum pressure that the pipe can use. If you're
Well, I
gonna,
don't know because they haven't specified what pipe they're using yet.
but they're just saying we're initially gonna raise it for 1480 and.
That's right.
A stronger pipe, they could up that to whatever.
Right. I mean, the pipe, we know it's going to be 30 inch, but they do come in various thicknesses. I think about the thinnest is half an inch. It also steps up to like 3/4 inch.
I called one of the people at FERC and asked about the process, and that person told me this is not a done deal. FERC is in the process of allowing them in their pre-filing to look at what they might do, but they would have to meet our requirements before we would allow them to have it. And now is the time that people who do not think they should have it should contact FERC for the reasons why the pipeline should not be here.
Yeah.
And that doesn't sound like done deal to me. It sounds like community has to get busy and do something.
Yeah, right.
Listen, I'm going to talk about this side of it.
Okay.
So, people, so anyway, I just want everybody to know that Brian has a certain perspective and not everybody agrees.
In fact, why don't we let
One
oh,
question. The gravel, you said precautions. What did you mean when you showed the precautions that a town could play? You mentioned gravel pits.
Well-
I didn't understand what you're talking about.
they're most likely going to need fill along the pipeline.
You're right.
So they're going to have to get it from local gravel pits.
Right.
So if the town, they want to have zoning ordinance regulating where gravel pits can be put in, and building codes as far as what the people are required to watch to meet when they put in a gravel pit.
What time of day they can operate?
Time, date,
And how
operate
much gravel,
setbacks.
how much gravel they can take, if you're going to take it all, you have money left in your road.
But gravels are privately owned, so is that an issue of they want to sell to these pipeline people? What is
Yeah,
that?
for instance, the town can regulate where gravel pits can be open,
Okay.
for example.
Okay.
Carol?
When the gentleman was talking about plugging into one of these pipelines.
Tapping into it.
Tapping into it. When you do that, you're going to have a compressor station nearby, don't you? Every
No,
time
no,
you
if you were compressing, you would step it down, so you wouldn't need a compressor station.
Huh?
If you were using for a distribution system, they operate at a much lower pressure
Yeah.
than the pipeline, so you need something to step it down, but it wouldn't be a compressor station.
What would it be? Would it be?
I don't know what you call it, but I think that's kind of an academic question because you're not going to build any around here. I mean, it's just not
Oh, I
economic.
know that. I just want, but the point is for that as
Their
well.
pressure reducing station.
Okay.
So what do we do when our local officials are telling us that they're gonna use it for amphenol, and they're saying it like that's obvious? I mean,
Well, that's
how do we
the-
get that information?
That's the leather stocking distribution system, that's not this transmission system.
No, they are saying they're gonna get gas for amphenol from this
Yeah, one
pipeline.
minute, yeah, we don't take too much.
One more question.
No, I think so.
Wait, one more I was gonna,
Oh, girl.
yeah, I wanted to ask, have you ever seen any pipeline where the citizens gathered together and actually fought it? Where there was a concentrated amount of a group, where they tried to stop it?
Okay, so.
I know, that's what you're gonna do. But have you ever seen it with the other pipelines? Like you said, the other ones were done deals. Did anybody fight the other ones?
I don't actually know.
You said one did.
Yes, I read that this morning, I don't know which one and I don't know why. I haven't looked at it yet.
Okay, for